Hare Krishna. So today we're continuing with the Bhagavad Gita portion of our ISKCON DC Bhakti Shastri course. And this is the 31st part of the Bhagavad Gita section. And today we're entering a new chapter. We're going to actually finish the entire chapter today. It's a short one, so we're going to cover all of chapter 15. That's verses 1 through 20. And the way I see it is this and the previous two chapters, 13, 14, and 15, really cover much of the same material, or the same general topic, but there's different kind of angles and different focuses put on it, and some more certain details and certain things in different chapters. The idea is that here we are, spiritual entities caught in the material world, and so and how do you get out of that and go back to Krishna, become liberated and go back to Krishna? Those topics have been there, 13 and 14, and we'll continue here in 15. But there's different details of certain aspects are given, certain perspectives are given, certain other information that relates that are given in different of the chapters. With the three of them together, you get a very well-rounded view. And the chapter is called the Yoga of the Supreme Person, or the Purushottam Yoga, as we're trying to reach that Supreme Person here in this chapter. So let's start verse 1. It's the Supreme Personality of Godhead said. And he's describing now the world here. It says, "It is said that there is an imperishable banyan tree that has its roots upward and its branches down, and whose leaves are the Vedic hymns. One who knows this tree is the knower of the Vedas." So we're getting a different take on the material world here. We heard about it as the field in chapter 13. We focused more on its components as the three modes in nature in chapter 14. And here we're going to take this kind of a metaphorical view of it this time. And Prabhupada says, he explains how this is a continuation of the previous topics. And he says, after the discussion of the importance of Bhakti Yoga, remember in both chapters, 13 and 14, and again here at 15, that bhakti is the way that we are able to extricate ourselves from the material world. So he says, after the discussion of the importance of bhakti yoga, one may question, what about the Vedas? So this chapter will answer that question. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, the 15th chapter states that detachment from matter is the cause of cessation of birth, that the soul is an amsha, a portion, a part of the Lord, and that Krishna is superior to matter and the jiva. And then Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur continues, and he says these are the kind of implied questions that chapter 15 are going to answer. He said, you said that the devotee surpassing the gunas, and this is from the last chapter, Sagunan Samatitya, attains the status of Brahman. What is the nature of this material world composed of the gunas? So this is a more kind of a vivid description. First we just talked about the field, and we talked about that was made from the gunas, the modes of material nature. Now we get this vivid kind of metaphorical understanding. What is the world's origin? What type of jiva surpasses samsara, a cycle of birth and death, by devotion to you? He says, you also spoke of the jiva being qualified for Brahman, Brahma Bhuyaya Kalpate, from the end of the last chapter. What is that Brahman? And who are you, the basis of the Brahman? Because Krishna said that. He's the basis of the Brahman, at the last verse of the last chapter. And the Vishnu says, anticipating these questions, the Lord now speaks. So, otherwise you can say this, he just amplifies on these particular points. Even if we don't have those questions, he's going to amplify upon those specific points that one could question. And then, so this is, and then now we're going to talk about kind of Let's continue on what the 15th chapter is about. Baladev Vijayabhushan says, detachment which causes steadiness in that discriminating knowledge about the jiva. The jiva's position as an amsha, that part of the worshipful Lord, and the Lord's supreme position over all others are described in this 15th chapter. So detachment which causes steadiness in that discriminating knowledge about the jiva. So we talked about how the mode of goodness corresponds with having knowledge. And so, and how there is a certain natural detachment that comes in that mode. There's a self-satisfaction within that causes one to be less interested and tied less closely to what's going on in the outside world. So that if we're detached, if we have detachment from the material world, so the knowledge that we have about our separation from it, that remains steady. Whereas if we're more in the mode of passion or ignorance, where we're suffering so much and trying to find relief in various ways, it's very difficult to remain, to have that knowledge remain. We forget who we are, and we get sucked into the world around us, and we think that's us. So that's why he's saying that detachment which causes steadiness and that discriminating knowledge about the jiva is one of the things that's being talked about here. And Srila Prabhupada says, for one who is engaged in fruitive activities, there is no end to the banyan tree. So it was unlimited, right? He wanders from one branch to another, to another, to another. Mm-hmm. This material world is like that. And then he says, now the basic principle of devotional service is detachment from material activities and attachment to the transcendental service of the Lord. The process of breaking attachment to the material world is discussed in the beginning of this chapter. So we're going to see it's quite justified, a bhakti-centered understanding of detachment here that Prabhupada and the other acharyas are going to talk about. Because the way the chapter goes, it says, as we'll see, we're supposed to have detachment to release ourselves, to begin to release ourselves, and then we'll surrender to the Lord, is what it will say. But we're going to find out here that really the most practical way to be detached is to begin the process of devotional service, to begin the process of surrendering, and that detachment comes partially as a byproduct. So we have the understanding, we'll talk about this more, but that's what he says. He says the basic principle of devotional service is detachment from material activities and attachment to the transcendental service. So those two things kind of happen, simultaneously. We begin service, right? So when whatever time you're spending in service is automatically taken from something else, usually something that's attached. Right? So he says that we somehow or other take up the process of devotional service, and then actually it'll be much easier to become detached. So it's not something we take up independently of devotion. It'll be discussed more. And then Prabhupada says, from the purport, one who wants to get out of this material existence must know this tree thoroughly through analytical study. Then he can cut off his relationship with it. So there's the two sides of the equation here. That's why the information here is important. That if we understand the world, this is also, it can be considered to be part of devotion. Right? If we understand the situation, that either leads us to devotion, or if we already have devotion to Krishna, it helps us to focus more on Krishna's service. It helps us to understand our situation, and helps us to focus on our devotion and try to increase it. So the knowledge given here, these chapters are oftentimes considered to be jnana, have a predominance of jnana or knowledge in them. But this is not knowledge that's separate from bhakti. It's for somebody who doesn't have bhakti, it can help lead them to it. But for us who already have it, it can help us apply the bhakti. So that's why he says we should thoroughly understand this tree through analytical study. We'll talk about this more. What happens is right now we're very attached to it. And so bhakti, through devotion, our attachment automatically decreases, but it doesn't get eliminated. We still have strong attachments. And so through the understanding and the analytical understanding, we can then perceive the dangers of that. And so then we can also lose some of our attraction for that. And so then instead of having the material attachment and bhakti pulling against each other, you weaken the side of the material attachment, and the bhakti then can move forward. That's why we'll see a lot of jnana even in Prabhupada's presentation of bhakti. He talks about the threefold miseries and the fourfold miseries and the cycle of birth and death, because we have to at least lose some enthusiasm. We have enthusiasm for material enjoyment, so we have to lose some of that at least. So the knowledge helps us to lose some of that enthusiasm. The bhakti will help us to really break it. But we have to lose some enthusiasm and shift some of it into our devotion. The root of this material existence grows upward. That's what it said in the verse. This means that it begins from the total material substance. This is from Prabhupada's purport. From the topmost planet of the universe. From there, the whole universe is expanded with so many branches representing the various planetary systems. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains on this that it comes from, and Prabhupada will say also, comes from the planet of Brahma, that's the top of the universe, but that Brahma is made out of Mahatattva, which is his body is made from Mahatattva, which is the first of when the creation starts, you have pradhana, the inert, inactive form of material nature. The first thing that comes from that is Mahat, the Mahatattva, the first transformation, when the Lord glances over it. And so that's why Prabhupada says, this means it begins from the total material substance, from the topmost planet of the universe. So, because this actually exists before there's any planets. But so she says that Brahma is kind of hooked in to that primordial substance of the material universe. So that explains how Prabhupada is saying that it begins from the total material substance, that's Mahatattva, from the topmost planet of the universe, that's Brahma's planet, the material universe here. From there, the whole universe is expanded with so many branches representing the various planetary systems. So that's what the branches are, all the different planetary systems, different types of entities. And then Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, Chandangshi, that's the Vedas, refers to the Vedas which expound karma. Because they expand the bondage of the material world, they are called the leaves, parnani. With these leaves, the tree becomes attractive. So the Vedas show us how we can, the karma kanda section of them show how we can hopefully attain many wonderful things into the material world, go to the heavenly planets, have have opulence and so many different things. So those are the leaves of the tree. They make it attractive because they seem to indicate that we can really be successful here if we do the right thing. And then Prabhupada says something a little different, and because there's two sides to this in this chapter. It is explained in this chapter that the purpose of Vedic study is to understand Krishna. Therefore, one who is in Krishna consciousness, who is engaged in devotional service, already knows the Vedas. So there's two things that are going to happen. First of all, the karma kanda section of the Vedas are part of the tree. And we're going to come over that. And so there's two kind of notions of the Vedas here in this chapter. And then I'm going to remind you of a couple of verses that we have in the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita, 42-43, chapter 2, 42-43, and then 245. This is 242-43. Men of small knowledge are very much attached to the flowery words of the Vedas, which recommend various fruitive activities for elevation to heavenly planets, resultant good birth, power, and so forth. Being desirous of sense gratification and opulent life, they say that there is nothing more than this. And to them it sounds like it's quite sufficient. So this is the thing, this is why how the karma kanda section of the Vedas is attractive. It makes the tree look attractive, that they can get these things. Heavenly planets, resultant good birth, power, and so forth. But then Krishna says in 45 to Arjuna, the Vedas deal mainly with the subject of the three modes of material nature. O Arjuna, become transcendental to these modes. Right? So the portion of the Vedas dealing with karma are the leaves of the tree, but the ultimate purpose of the Vedas is to know Krishna, which will be revealed later in the chapter. So when it says the leaves of the Vedas, it means that portion of the Vedas that recommend the karma, to do pious karma. Whereas the real point of the Veda, Krishna will mention later on, is to know him and to fulfill what he said here, to become transcendental. So like I mentioned, chapters 13 through 15 all talk about the entanglement of the jivas in the material world and of their liberation from it and their ultimate connection with the Lord. So that just with different focuses, different little different angles, different more detail from one thing to another, but they all kind of talk generally about that same thing. Then Prabhupada says, we can see that the trees on the bank reflect upon the water with their... This is something that isn't in... that Krishna doesn't talk about directly in the verses, nor do the other commentators say something, but Prabhupada, he uses this example quite a bit. And so I thought we had to mention this. He says, we can see that the trees on the bank reflect upon the water with their branches down and roots up. Because he says, we don't see an upside down tree in this world. In other words, the tree of this material world is only a reflection of the real tree of the spiritual world. This reflection of the spiritual world is situated on desire, just as a tree's reflection is situated on water. That's interesting. See, that's our desire that keeps us here. Desire is the cause of the things being situated in this reflected material light. This tree being the reflection of the real tree is an exact replica. Everything is there in the spiritual world. So Prabhupada uses this example quite a bit. I don't know if there are some other commentators I haven't seen where he got it from, or it's just his own contribution here and his own insight, or maybe it could even come from a different scripture. I'm not sure where it originally comes from, but Prabhupada uses this quite a lot, and how he explains the relationship between the spiritual and the material world, and it's quite a valuable thing. We deal with it quite a bit, so I thought we had to mention it here. So in verse 2, this analogy is taken a bit further. The branches of this tree extend downward and upward, nourished by the three modes of material nature. The twigs are the objects of the senses. This tree also has roots going down, and these are bound to the fruitive actions of human society. Okay? And so so you can see that when you have a branches of a tree, some of them go down closer to where the roots are, and some of them rise up into the sky. Here we have the upside down ones, so the lower branches will be the top of the top of the tree as we would usually see it, and the upper branches will be closer to the root because the tree is upside down. So when they say lower branches here, they mean what would be the top of the tree, furthest from the root. And the highest ones would be closer to the root, since it's inverted. It says, and so Prabhupada says in the purport, in the lower parts there are variegated manifestations of living entities, human beings, animals, horses, cows, dogs, cats, etc. On the upper parts are higher forms of living entities, the demigods, Gandharvas, and many other higher species of life. It's different planets, different species. And then he says, as a tree is nourished by water, so this tree is nourished by the three modes of material nature. So they're the water that keeps the tree growing in this metaphorical example. And then he says the tips of the branches, and these are I put this in my twigs because that's what it is. The tips of the branch, he says, are the senses, the ears, nose, eyes, etc., which are attached to the enjoyment of different sense objects. The twigs are sound, form, touch, and so on. The sense objects. So you have the little small, you have the large branches and smaller branches and little tiny twigs that come out. The twigs themselves are the senses. No, I'm sorry. The twigs themselves are the sense objects. So the sounds, tastes, smell, touches, these things, sights, right? And then the tips are the senses, because the two are to always stay together. That's what they explain. The two of them stay together. The senses and the sense objects are always going together. The senses are looking for the sense objects and perceiving them. Okay, so they're an important part of the tree that keep the tree going.
Big root.
Huh?
I didn't get that analogy.
A twig, like the little small, tiny, tiny little. There's branches and smaller branches and little tiny, twigs. Like the little thin little branches. They're composed of the sense objects. I'm sorry, and then the end of the twig are the senses, because the senses and the sense objects always go together. Our senses, and we have eyes, and we're always looking at stuff. We have ears, and we're always hearing stuff. We have our nose, and we're smelling stuff. The two go right together, so they're right there on the tree together. And then there's subsidiary roots, are attachments and aversions, which are byproducts of different varieties of suffering and sense enjoyment. So the combination of the senses having sensations give us, some of them are pleasant to us, some of them are unpleasant, so we develop attachments and aversions to these things. And it says these are these other roots, because they determine our conduct. He says, which are byproducts of different varieties of suffering and sense enjoyment. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I just read that. The subsidiary roots are attachments and aversions, which are byproducts of different varieties of suffering and sense enjoyment. Because I said through the senses we suffer or enjoy, so we develop attachment and aversions. And then the tendencies towards piety and impiety are considered to develop from these secondary roots, which spread in all directions. So because of our attachments and aversions, we act in certain ways. They determine so much of our behavior. We tend to move towards what we're attached to and avoid what we're not attached to. Arjuna had that problem. He wanted to run away from the battlefield. He had an aversion. And he almost gave up his duty, his dharmic duty, because of it. And Duryodhana, he wanted the kingdom. He had an attachment. And so he acted inappropriately in order to try to get it. So they determine so much. How that goes, and so what happens with that is that then that causes either your attachment and aversions, they tend to deviate you from dharma. That's why we have to become detached. So these things, so the secondary roots are determining. They develop from they're part of these secondary roots, which are attachments and aversions. Our piety and impiety develop from these roots, our attachments and aversions. Okay, because our attachments tend to maybe even take us away from dharma, and our aversions also, both of them can deviate us.
Our inclination for piety or non-piety are dependent on the attachment.
The attachments and aversions, because it said like Arjuna, he was averse to fighting, so he almost gave up his dharma. Krishna saved him, and Duryodhana did. He because he was attached to that, So they have a tendency to tug on us in both directions. So after one enjoys the results of virtuous activities in the upper planetary systems, he comes down to this earth and renews his karma, or fruit of activities for promotion. This planet of human beings is considered to be the field of activities. That's in the purport. And Baladeva Vibhushan says those roots are compared to the tangled roots emanating from the banyan tree. And he says it is well known that this earth planet is the place for accruing karma. That's where it is. And then going on, there's a couple of verses I wanted to quote in this regard. And that's 727. O scion of Bharata, O conqueror of the foe, all living entities are born into delusion, bewildered by dualities arisen from desire and hate. That's detachment and aversion. Same words, raga dvesha. And then there are principles to regulate attachment and aversion pertaining to the senses and their objects. One should not come under control of such attachment and aversion because they are stumbling blocks in the path of self-realization. So controlled attachment and aversion can allow one to perform pious karma, because you want to have You want to get what you want, right? And you know that the best way to do it is to follow Dharma. Even Dhritarashtra was saying he knew that they were going to fail because it was against Dharma. They saw some indication, but he just couldn't stop themselves. So a person who has controlled attachment and aversion is intelligent enough to take up the path of pious activities. And so that can take you to heavenly. The one purport says that you can go to heavenly planets. And then afterwards you come back down to the world of karma, the human beings. But someone who's under the control of attachment and aversion will deviate from Dharma and perform impious karma. They can then go down even into the lower species. But then again, they slowly elevate up and come back to the earthly planet where karma is made. That's where it's accrued. It's the place of karma. So these little air roots, like I've got a little picture of a banyan tree here with the little air roots hanging down. So the root of the tree originally is from the Brahmaloka, Lord Brahma, but also there are supplementary roots coming into the earthly planet because that's where karma is done. Okay, that sustains the tree in a little bit lesser way. Okay, so now we're going to go to 3 and 4. The real form of this tree cannot be perceived in this world. This is 3 and 4. No one can understand where it ends, where it begins, or where its foundation is. Right? We don't see any of those things. But with determination, one must cut down the strongly rooted tree with the weapon of detachment, asanga shastrena. Therefore, one must seek that place from which, having gone, one never returns, and there surrender to that Supreme Personality of Godhead, from whom everything began and from whom everything has extended since time immemorial. Okay, so that's what we have to do with it. We've been talking about that in various ways previously, and so this is what we got to do. Okay, Krishna says, and in the purport Prabhupada says, when entangled with the material expansions of the tree, one cannot see how far the tree extends, nor can one see the beginning of this tree. Okay, we can bear that out in our experience. And then Prabhupada says, one has to search out that origin of this tree, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, through the association of persons who are in knowledge of that Supreme Personality of Godhead. So he says how we do it. Then by understanding, one becomes gradually detached from this false reflection of reality, and by knowledge one can cut off the connection and actually become situated in the real tree. He talks about the reflection, so now he means that, so we're the reflection of the spiritual world, the real tree is the spiritual world, is what he's talking about there. So again, he's emphasizing bhakti as the way we attain, as a crucial part of how we attain the detachment. Also with the information given, the knowledge given, that's going to support that. To gain the favor of that personality of Godhead, I like how he said that, because we already heard how Krishna is active, especially we heard in chapter 10, and particularly how he's active in our devotion. He's a shining lamp he enters our heart with a shining lamp of knowledge. He guides us with intelligence to how to come back with him. To gain the favor of that personality of Godhead one has only to surrender, and this is a result of performing devotional service by hearing, chanting, etc. Now, I'll mention that the process of surrender is an ongoing process. It happens by degrees generally. And so, but when it starts out with a little faith, right? And as he mentions, association with the devotees, engagement in devotional service, and as we progress, our faith increases, our surrender increases, our engagement increases. It's a dynamic process, or bhakti. And Prabhupada says, therefore one must learn detachment by discussion of spiritual science based on authoritative scriptures, and one must hear from persons who are actually in knowledge. So now he's emphasizing more of the information, the knowledge aspect of it. And these aren't separate. Right? Bhakti, the part of our practice of bhakti is to understand the reality of things. We're not doing it for something separate. Right? But there's the associating with devotees and hearing and chanting and performing those kind of devotional activities. But there's also the study, scriptural study, as we're trying to do here, that are important components. And so just by performing bhakti, so we get the higher taste, right? And we begin to get detachment from other things. We heard this all the way back in the second chapter. But then also by the information, it supports our surrender, it supports our practice, it supports our faith, it supports our understanding of how to act. So both of those things they're both parts of bhakti. He says, therefore, to get out of the entanglement of the strong banyan tree of material life, one must surrender to Krishna. As soon as one surrenders unto Krishna, one becomes detached automatically from this material extension. Now he's talking more about devotion, the devotional practice. Here it says you should, in the verse, right, it said you should become detached. With detachment, you should cut down the tree and then seek out the Lord and surrender to Him. All right? So Prabhupada is saying that the more practical way is you surrender now. You start to worship now, and that will provide you with the detachment. And that's the practical way. We've talked about that when we talked about the yoga ladder, how difficult it is to go through the steps of becoming detached, of discovering the soul and the super soul. Is it's not practical in this age. We discussed at length how bhakti is the only practical solution. So here in this case also, Prabhupada and the other acharyas just emphasize the bhakti. We have to do it like that. That the detachment will come partially through our bhakti. And then, now he says, this is text 5, those who are free from false prestige, illusion, and false association, who understand the eternal, who are done with material lust, who are freed from the dualities of happiness and distress, and who, unbewildered, know how to surrender unto the Supreme Person, attain to that eternal kingdom. Okay? And so then Prabhupada comments here in the purport, let's see, that he says, in performing bhakti, this is Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. He says, in performing bhakti, what qualities do people develop so they can achieve that goal? This verse explains that. Yeah. And then Prabhupada says, the surrendering process is described here very nicely. And this is something that Prabhupada does. It's really insightful, actually, because and this comes kind of from both sides of the equation, too, of how we grow in our bhakti. So Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is talking. He says, if we perform a devotional service, we will gain these qualities. These qualities come as a result of our devotional service. So sometimes we talk about that. We talk about emphasizing how just because these things come from our soul, devotional qualities are qualities of the soul, and as the soul is awakened, they come out. And so sometimes certain things come out of us through bhakti, seemingly spontaneously. They weren't there and they come about because they're our real nature. They manifest that way. But here Prabhupada, he says, the surrendering process is described here very nicely. So by that he means we acquire these qualities. He did that in chapter 13, where it mentioned knowledge. These are elements of knowledge, and Prabhupada called that a process. That we try to acquire these different qualities, right? That's a process. So Prabhupada now is emphasizing the other side. It's all still bhakti. Because what happens is that we know that these things are intrinsic qualities of the soul. We know that bhakti is an intrinsic quality of the soul, but we practice bhakti. Right? It's called sadhana bhakti, it's called devotional service and practice. So we don't have a lot of bhakti, a lot of devotion, but we try to do devotional things and cultivate that bhakti. Right? And it works because we're connecting ourselves with our real nature. Prabhupada uses that example of the young child who's able to learn how to walk because that ability is already there latent. It just has to be practiced. So it's the same way with these devotional qualities. So by doing other devotional activities, they can arise, or their rising can be supported. But we also can make a devotional effort to try to acquire them. We talked about things that are trying to acquire certain qualities separately from bhakti, like we're going to become tolerant, of happiness and distress and things. So we go out of our way to make ourselves unhappy and try to tolerate, to put ourselves in. We go, now it's getting cold out here, so we go out without a coat. We go out in our shorts and that kind of stuff. The vanaprasthas, it says in the Bhagavatam, that they do like that. They stand up to their necks in cold water in the wintertime and build fires around themselves in the summertime. This is building artificial tolerance. Right? And so what we do is we monitor our behavior and understand what real devotional behavior is like. We have that, that sadachar, a devotional behavior. And it has all these qualities that are mentioned here. And when we see that we're falling short of them, we inquire about, why do we have them? What's the reasoning behind them? And we see how we can do a better job of that. And Prabhupada talks about this later on. He talks about, he's going to talk a little bit about some of the foundations of these qualities. And we should, we can meditate on others who have them. We can try to be inspired by others, so we can make a devotional effort to develop and increase these qualities. That's not separate. That also is how bhakti does it. That's part of bhakti. So sometimes people have this argument, like, okay, I don't have this devotional quality, I don't have any tolerance. Okay, so I'm just going to chant Hare Krishna until I develop it. Okay, well, maybe it happens, but probably your intolerance is going to make you make offenses, which is going to hurt your bhakti. Probably. So we probably have to address it. See, how can I be more understanding? How can I be more tolerant? These things help us to chant nicely. So these qualities are part of bhakti. So therefore, you can say it supports the rest of our bhakti. They're interdependent. And so if we don't have Vaishnava qualities, or we don't have them sufficiently, we really should be noticing that, and we should be trying to see where our misunderstanding is, what the problem is, and we should be praying and trying to do a little better with them. That's part of bhakti. That's not outside of bhakti. Okay, and then Prabhupada says one should know by the cultivation of real knowledge that he is not Lord of material nature. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is the Lord. He says this is the root of the pride that's there. That he said that we're supposed to be prideless. That's one of the qualities that we're supposed to have. That's of one who's able to get out of the tree, go back to the spiritual world. So the root of that is is that we think that we are the Lord of material nature. That's the course of the press. So we can examine the underlying deficiencies in our understanding that cause us to have these negative qualities as well. And Prabhupada says, for one who is always expecting some honor in this world, that's another side of the pride. The word I think is amana. And so mana just often means like that, giving, wanting respect. And so he calls them both things, pride and wanting respect here. He covers both of those in one, kind of two dimensions to that word. For one who is always expecting some honor in this material world, it is not possible to surrender to the Supreme Person. If you want honor, it's hard to give honor. Right? You just want to, right? It's hard. You want to be on that receiving end. And so giving honor doesn't come so easy. And the Prabhupada says, one has to get out of this false notion that human society is the proprietor of this world. When one is freed from such a false notion, he becomes free from all the false associations caused by familiar, this is the giving up the useless sangha, by familiar, social, and national affections. These faulty associations bind one to this material. So even that's related to it. And even so that there's the human society is the proprietor of this world, not the Lord. Right? So maybe I don't own it individually, but we together do. Right? We together own it. And so it says then we get caught up in familial, social and national affections, is what he says. And that binds us. Okay? Now, we understand in bhakti that we don't give those things up, but we Krishnaize them. That we try together to act in Krishna's service. It's not that we become isolated from everybody. Prabhupada says the family is a natural, family members are natural receptacles of our recipients of our affection. And so, but of course, if there's no way to do that, then sometimes you have to consider. But it doesn't mean that we completely separate ourselves from the world. But we try to act on it in a devotional way. And then we talked about this with the nectar of instruction a lot. And Prabhupada says, when one has an understanding of things as they are, he becomes free from all dual conceptions such as happiness and distress, pleasure and pain. Especially we understand who we are as a spiritual being. Then we talked about this a lot when we talked about the yoga ladder in the first 6 chapters. When one begins to experience oneself as a spiritual entity, the sensations just seem to no longer be important to us. They become very superficial. So it's a transformation that it happens when we become deeply integrated into the soul. And Krishna says in the 13th verse of the 15th verse of the 2nd chapter, that when you're sama dukkha sukham dhiram, equal and happy, then you're eligible for liberation. Somratattvaya kalpate. Otherwise, now we're controlled by happiness and distress, that attachment and aversion, like that. So in the 6th verse here, and now says the supreme abode, that supreme abode of mind. So we're going to hear about it now. So we were supposed to go there, right, to the real tree, is not illumined by the sun or moon, nor by fire or electricity. Those who reach it never return to this material world. So that's nice. And then in the purport, Prabhupada says, in the spiritual sky there is no need of sunshine, moonshine, fire, or electricity, because all the planets are self-luminous. The shining effulgence of all those planets called Vaikunthas constitutes the shining sky known as the Brahma Jyotir. And he says, part of that shining effulgence is covered by the Mahatattva, the material world. So that's why we're dark here. And then Prabhupada says, one should be captivated by this information. He should desire to transfer himself to the eternal world and extricate himself from this false reflection of reality. So this should be exciting for us. Exciting news, exciting information. And he says, for one who is too much attached to this material world, it is very difficult to cut that attachment. So now he's saying why he's been emphasizing devotion. But if he takes to Krishna consciousness, there is a chance of gradually becoming detached. One has to associate himself with devotees, those who are in Krishna consciousness. So we really have to be able to activate the experience of our souls. And devotion is who we really are. Right? It says that we're Nitya Krishna Das. That means servants, right? So serving Krishna is our real identity. That's who we are. And so that's why bhakti is so effective. So we talked about in the yoga ladder how when you become less interested in how things are going on, like you do your duty without expectation of result, that therefore you're not monitoring everything so closely. Right? If you've made an investment, right, and you're hoping for a return on that, you're checking the stock price, you're doing this all the time, seeing how the company is doing. You're very, very interested when you're doing something for a result. In this nishkama karma, you do what you're supposed to do, and whatever happens, happens. So that automatically then you come more towards the mode of goodness, and you begin to experience yourself as a soul. You get that inner happiness comes, and that helps you. And as that increases, then you perform sacrifices, you do other kind of penances and disciplines to try to increase that further. And when you really do that powerfully, then you can start to meditate. We talked about how difficult all this is, But and that's how they are able to become equal in happiness and distress. So that's why Prabhupada says it's very difficult. So we do is try to access the soul directly through the service. We're actually acting on the soul platform when we do something for Krishna. And so then that access is what allows you to become detached. Okay? So that's why Prabhupada and the other acharyas are emphasizing bhakti first, detachment comes as a byproduct. Or a little detachment means you want to give some energy to Krishna, to start up devotional service, that kind of stuff. So 7 is, and this is a verse that Prabhupada quotes so many times. The living entities in this conditioned world are my eternal fragmental parts, angsha. Mame vangsho, my parts, he says. Eternal fragmental parts. Due to conditioned life, they are struggling very hard with the 6 senses. Shashtan indriyani, and which includes the mind. So there's the five knowledge gathering senses, and the sight, the eyes, nose, ears, tongue, skin, and then the mind. And it says your karshati, it says that they're really struggling hard with those things. This is our situation. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, who is that jiva who, crossing samsara by devotion to you, finally attains that place? He says, this is what's coming up now. Who can do it? How do they do it? And he says, the jiva is eternal, sanatanaha, and in the conditioned state drags the senses, the 6th of which is the mind. He is like a person who drags chains bolted on his feet, which he proudly accepts, thinking, these are mine. We'll see here, Prabhupada seemed to pick up on, because Prabhupada used these commentaries when making his purports. We'll see a place where he seems to be following that, but he has a little bit different take on it. But Vishwanath is saying that our senses, we're dragging them around, and they're really chains, kind of burden, but we're very happy with them and proudly thinking that they're mine. We don't see them as a burden. And then Prabhupada says in the purport, the living entity is the fragmental part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, eternally. Because the one thing that Prabhupada and Baladev Vidyabhushan both talk a lot about in their commentary on this verse is we don't want to start thinking that we want to counteract the notion of impersonalism here. That he's a part, an amsha of the Lord, right? And therefore he merges back into the Lord. A separated part, so there's a hole there in the Supreme, and then you plug that one back in. That's how the impersonalists may get some ideas with that. He's a part, so you mix him with the whole, and everything will be fine. So he says the living entity is the fragmental part and parcel of the Supreme Lord eternally. So he doesn't go back and says it is not that he assumes individuality in his conditioned life and in his liberated state becomes one with the Supreme Lord. This is eternally fragmented. It is clearly said sanatana. So he's refuting that. And then he says, according to the Vedic version, the Supreme Lord manifests and expands himself innumerable expansions, of which the primary expansions are called Vishnu Tattva, and the secondary expansions are called the living entities. So Krishna has, he has expansions, so they're his own internal potency. Other forms of, he has more Krishnas, and he can have also Rama and so many other and Vishnu forms that are his, that are as powerful as he is. And then he has the smaller expansions, us. So we're smaller expansions.
So is the soul not the Vishnu?
No, we're tiny, much tiny. Vishnu Tattva means we are controllers. We have the Supreme Lord, and so that we're not by a long shot. So we're the secondary expansions. Prabhupada says. But he says, as fragmental parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord, the living entities also have fragmental portions of his qualities, of which independence is one. And by misuse of that independence, one becomes a conditioned soul, and by proper use of independence, he is always liberated. So bhakti is a voluntary choice. The separated expansions of living entities are eternally servitors, he says. That's our position. And then he says that fragmental portion, when liberated from the bodily entanglement, revives its original spiritual body in the spiritual sky, in the spiritual planet, and enjoys association with the Supreme Lord. And that, I think, is really what comes through this mama angsha, my parts. It doesn't mean that Krishna is missing something in one sense of himself. He's fragmented, and we talked about that in Ishvara Upanishad. So many other expansions are there, and he remains the complete whole. And but it does mean that we're dear to him. They're mine. Everything is an expansion of his. We say all energies are there. There's nothing that exists isn't him. But he says he's claiming them as mine, and that's why we go to him and we associate with him. There's a certain affection, I think, that's being revealed by that mama, that mine, my parts. And then Prabhupada says the word here's where he kind of picks up some of the things that Vishwanath said. The word karshati, struggling or grappling hard, is very significant. The conditioned soul is bound up as though shackled by iron chains. He uses that same example. He is bound up by the false ego, and the mind is the chief agent which is driving him in this material existence. When the mind is in the mode of goodness, his activities are good. When the mind is in the mode of passion, his activities are troublesome. And when the mind is in the mode of ignorance, he travels to the lower species of life. So that's the problem with the senses and the mind. We, of course, heard a lot about that in the last chapter. That's why we're struggling with it. It's causing us all kinds of difficulties and keeping us going through, at least through the cycle of birth and death. 8. The living entity in the material world carries his different conceptions of life from one body to another, as the air carries aromas. Thus he takes one kind of body and again quits it to take another. Now, Prabhupada uses, kind of the more literal meaning of this is, Vishwanath kind of gives us, he says, in dragging around the senses, what does the jiva do? When the jiva, the master of his senses, Ishvara, accepts a body and leaves the body, he goes away dragging these senses along with the subtle body. The word in the verse is etani, which Prabhupada translates as all these. So he's talking about the senses from the previous verse. Along with the subtle body. Prabhupada amplifies it a little bit, gives us a little bit more information. He says when he says he carries his different conceptions of life. Because the mind pretty much is doing that. Along with the subtle body. This is like the wind taking the fragrances with its subtle elements from the receptacles of fragrance, ashayat, such as garlands or sandalwood, and going elsewhere. Okay. So there's a continuity there. Prabhupada also, because even Vishwanath saying that the rest of the subtle body is going. It's not just the senses and the mind. It's the whole intelligence and false ego is going actually. See, so Prabhupada is saying that so in the verse it just kind of means the senses are going that we talked about in the previous verse, but it also means more because the whole subtle body goes. So Krishna is just speaking kind of in a simplified version.
The memory is also the part of senses.
Yeah, it's part of the mind. So it is stated here that the subtle body, which carries this Prabhupada here, it is stated here that the subtle body, which carries the conception of the next body, develops another body in the next life. This process of transmigrating from one body to another and struggling while in the body is called karshati, or the struggle for existence distance. He brings that back up from the past verse. So, and he says, at the time of death, the consciousness he has created will carry him on to the next type of body. If he has made his consciousness like that of a cat or dog, he is sure to change to a cat or dog's body. And if he has fixed his consciousness on godly qualities, he will change into the form of a demigod. And if he is in Krishna consciousness, he will be transferred to Krishna Loka in the spiritual world and will associate with Krishna. There's a continuity there. Because if we could see our past life, as long as it wasn't something really low, if we had a previous human birth, we would recognize a lot of our same tendencies. From that, our personality would be there. It went from that aroma from that went to the next one, but it can change over time. And so if we went back even further, we might not recognize ourselves so much. And we get, and so we get an appropriate body according to that, to that fits that kind of subtle body at that time. And then, so that's how it's happening. And then it says in 15:9, the living entity, thus taking another gross body, obtains a certain type of ear, eye, tongue, nose, and sense of touch. See, so we're talking about those senses, which are grouped about the mind. He thus enjoys a particular set of sense objects. So Krishna kind of focuses on the senses and the mind, but it implies the rest of the subtle body. And so the Prabhupada and Vishwanath also mentioned that. The whole thing goes. The manas, buddhi, and ahankara go along with the senses. And Vishwanath says, having gone into a body, what does he do? Taking shelter, adhisthaya, of the senses, such as the ear and also the mind, he enjoys the object of the senses, vishayan, such as sound. So he takes up the same process again. All right? The desire is continued. His momentum from the past life carries over into the new one, and he starts doing it again, engaging the senses and the mind in enjoyment. And Prabhupada says, consciousness is originally pure like water. So that's what we're doing lifetime after lifetime. Consciousness is originally pure like water, but if we mix water with a certain color, it changes. Similarly, consciousness is pure, for the spiritual soul is pure, but consciousness is changed according to the association of the material qualities. Real consciousness is Krishna consciousness. When therefore one is situated in Krishna consciousness, he is in his pure life. But if his consciousness is adulterated by some type of material mentality, in the next life he gets a corresponding body. So, now 15:10, he says, the foolish cannot understand how a living entity can quit his body, nor can they understand what sort of body he enjoys under the spell of the modes of nature, but one whose eyes are trained in knowledge can see all this. And the word here is jnana chakshu, and Prabhupada says the word jnana chakshu is very significant. Without knowledge, one cannot understand how a living entity leaves, or even that there's one there, actually, right? His present body, nor what form of body he is going to take in his next life, or even why he is living in a particular type of body. This requires a great amount of knowledge understood from Bhagavad Gita and similar literatures heard from a bona fide spiritual master. And he says, then persons who are everlastingly fooled by lust and desire lose all power to understand their change of body and their stay in a particular body. They cannot comprehend it. And that made me remember Bhagavad Gita 2:29. Right? Some look on the soul as amazing, some describe him as amazing, and some hear of him as amazing, while others, even after hearing about him, cannot understand him at all. So most people in the world don't have an understanding that there's a soul, that there's reincarnation. And even those who do, many of them think that there's no way for liberation to happen. Okay? They're like the ones we quoted before who just think that all there is pious activities to get a higher birth. Krishna mentioned in the second chapter. Most people don't even know there's a soul, period. So that's what's saying here in this birth. Unless you have jnana chakshu, you can't know it. And those who do, they think that the soul needs a body. They can't imagine a soul separate. They don't think there's liberation. So that's what's happening here. And so then in 15:11 it says, the endeavoring transcendentalists who are situated in self-realization can see all this clearly. But those whose minds are not developed and who are not situated in self-realization cannot see what is taking place, though they may try. They may be interested. And Prabhupada says, in the present day, there are many so-called yogis. And he takes a shot at modern-day yoga here. In the present day, there are many so-called yogis, and there are many so-called associations of yogis, but because the word here in the verse is yoginaha. Yatato yoginas jainam is yogina. Transcendentalists, that's how he translates it. So it means yogis is the word there. So that's why Prabhupada plays off that here in the purport. He says, in the present day there are so many so-called yogis, and there are many so-called associations of yogis, but they are actually blind in the matter of self-realization. They are simply addicted to some sort of gymnastic exercise and are satisfied if the body is well built and healthy. They have no other information. He says, such people cannot understand the process of the transmigration of the soul. So this is when Krishna's talking about the yoginas here, he means this particular type of yogi. And those are type, Prabhupada says, only those who are actually in the yoga system and have realized the self, the world, and the Supreme Lord, in other words, the bhakti yogis, those engaged in pure devotional service in Krishna consciousness, can understand how things are taking place. So Krishna uses the word yogina. It's got to be bhakti yogi, bhakti yoga. And Baladev Vidyabhushan says this verse implies that the soul is hard to understand. So even though they try, they can't do it. That's what he says. 12. The splendor of the sun, which dissipates darkness, the darkness of this whole world comes from me, and the splendor of the moon and the splendor of fire also from me. And Prabhupada says, the unintelligent cannot understand how things are taking place, but one can begin to be established in knowledge by understanding what the Lord explains here. Everyone sees the sun, moon, fire, and electricity. So, so people who can't understand the soul, and try to attain transcendence through that understanding, he says we can begin to understand the Lord through these manifestations. We saw this in in chapter 6. We saw that people who follow the yoga ladder, they have to withdraw all of their senses, all their attention. I'm sorry, not the sense, all their attention from the senses and the mind. Then they can see themselves, and they can see the super soul. It's a very difficult process. And what Krishna started in chapter 7 and onward is he was showing how we can see Krishna in the world around us. We can use our senses. We don't have to withdraw the intention from it, and we can see Krishna. Krishna says, "I'm all the 8 separated potencies are my are out here in the world. You are also my energy. The soul is the energy." He was showing. He says, "I pervade everything, by unmanifest form." So he was showing us how we can see him. He talked about I'm the light of the sun and the moon back at that time. We can see Krishna with our material senses. We can do that. So we don't need to withdraw our attention from everything, which is very difficult to do, in order to begin to see Krishna. So these people who don't have the ability even to see the soul, of course we can. How much do we see ourselves? We can use this. So this is how it's beautiful. It says, well, the unintelligent cannot understand how things are taking place, this transmigration, but one can begin to be established in knowledge by understanding what the Lord explains here. Beautiful. Everyone sees the sun, moon, fire, and electricity. One should simply try to understand that the splendor of the sun, the splendor of the moon, and the splendor of electricity or fire are coming from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. We become Krishna conscious in that way. And then he says, without his mercy there cannot be sun. Without his mercy there cannot be moon. And without his mercy there cannot be fire. And without the help of the sun, moon, and fire, no one can live. These are some thoughts to provoke Krishna consciousness in the conditioned soul. So these are some thoughts. We should think about our dependence upon the Lord. So both, not only do we see that's him, but because of that we're existing. That's really beautiful. The Prabhupada's purport there is really, really, really profound there and beautiful. Some thoughts to provoke Krishna consciousness in the conditioned soul. Really explain that so beautifully there. I enter into each planet, and by my energy they stay in orbit. I become the moon, and thereby supply the juice of life to all vegetables. And then Prabhupada says, by his strength and energy, all moving and non-moving things stay in their place. It is said that in the Vedic hymns, that because of the Supreme Personality of God, the sun is shining and the planets are steadily moving. Were it not for him, all the planets would scatter like dust in air and perish. This seems to be coming from Baladev Vidyabhushan's commentary, because Prabhupada based some of his purports on him, because he said, and he explains it this way: entering the earth, which is a lump of dust, I make it firm, and thus support all moving and non-moving things by my Shakti. This indicates that, if not for his power, the earth would perish, dissolving like a fistful of dust. A sand. He says sand. Huh?
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. So when it means stay in orbit, it doesn't just mean, because Prabhupada sometimes says that Lord Ananta Shesha is the force of gravity, but he also just, they would just dissolve. That's why he says it's scattered like dust. So he says it makes it firm, it holds together, otherwise it would just disintegrate. And then Prabhupada says, due to the moon's influence, the vegetables become delicious. Without moonshine, the vegetables can neither grow nor taste succulent. Human society is working, living comfortably, and enjoying food due to the supply from the Supreme Lord. Otherwise, mankind cannot survive. So that adds to that same meditation. So without the Lord's energy, the earth disintegrates into dust. We fall off, so it's supporting us all. Without the moon, without the sun, in all these ways, the Lord is intimately involved in our existence, and we're completely dependent. Now, 14. I am the fire of digestion in the bodies of all living entities, and I join with the air of life, outgoing and ingoing, to digest the 4 kinds of foodstuffs. Okay, so even if you have the food, okay, yeah, right? Therefore, since he is helping the digestion of all kinds of foodstuff, the living entity is not independent in the eating process. Unless the Supreme Lord helps him in digesting, there is no possibility of eating. He thus produces and digests foodstuff, and by his grace we are enjoying life. Again, and then Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur gives the 4 types. Prabhupada mentions them, but he gives examples with his. The 4 types of food are chewed with the teeth, bhaksha, like roasted chickpeas, he says, swallowed by the tongue without using the teeth, bhoja, such as soup, licked, which is leha, such as raw sugar, and sucked items, kosha, in which the chewed portion is discarded, such as sugarcane stick. So you're chewing it up and you spit out the other portion. Now this next verse, Prabhupada quotes so many times. Sarvasya chaham hridisana vishto matasvatir jnanam apohanam cha vadaishcha sarvar aham eva vedyo vedanta krit vedavid eva chaham. I am seated in everyone's heart, and from me comes remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. By all the Vedas I am to be known. Indeed, I am the compiler of Vedanta, and I am the knower of the Vedas. Very, very quoted by Prabhupada so much. From me, mataha, in the form of... This is Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. From me, mataha, in the form of intelligence, there is remembrance of sensations from objects previously perceived. From me, there is also knowledge arising through contact of the senses with the sense objects. So you understand... intelligence is the power of understanding. So you have the sensations and you know how to understand them. In robotics, that's one of the challenges. The robots can have superior sensing devices than we can, but how to understand that information and apply it. And also the removal of both knowledge and memory. Having told how he helps the jiva in his bound state, the Lord then tells how he assists the jiva to attain liberation. I am known through the Vedas. So we heard all the different ways that the Lord, he sustains the earth through the sun and through the moon. He provides us food. He digests everything. So he's supporting our material existence in all different ways, including residing in the heart and giving us intelligence to understand things, giving us memory. All these things that we're using every moment to exist, the Lord is intimately related to. But then it's not what he wants from us. He wants us to become liberated and come back to him. So then how does he do that? Through the Vedas and through his other such activities, but through the Vedas here, as he's saying. And so Prabhupada says the Supreme Lord is situated as Paramatma. So notice that Vishwanath said intelligence, and Prabhupada says Paramatma, which we understand. The two aren't exactly so distinct. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, it said that the way that the Paramatma communicates with us is through the intelligence. It says the intelligence is the form direction of the supersoul. There's a Sanskrit compound there. So Vishwanath also is understanding the Paramatmas there. He's just saying that's the kind of the tangible way the Paramatma is helping us, is through the intelligence. So there's really not a conflict there. The Supreme Lord is situated as Paramatma in everyone's heart, and it is from him that all activities are initiated. The living entity forgets everything of his past life, but he has to act according to the direction of the Supreme Lord, who is witness to all his work. Therefore he begins his work according to his past deeds. Required knowledge is supplied to him, and remembrance is given to him, and he forgets also about his past life. So this is also we have certain impressions, that some scars that happen to us that affect us from previous lifetimes. The Lord helps us with that. He also makes us forget many of the things of our past life, so we take this life seriously. So Prabhupada talks about it in that way also. It's not just about the ordinary remembrance and forgetfulness, although that's part of it as well, but also from our past lives. Prabhupada says here, it says, so not only does a living entity enjoy or suffer in this world according to the dictation from the Supreme Lord, situated locally in the heart, but he receives the opportunity to understand the Vedas from him. If one is serious about understanding the Vedic knowledge, then Krishna gives the required intelligence. We heard that in chapter 10. One can attain perfection in 3 stages. This is interesting here. This is sambandha, relationship, abhideya practice, and prayojana, perfection. By understanding the Vedic literature, one can understand his relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. By performing the different processes, one can approach him, and at the end one can attain the supreme goal, who is no other than the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In this verse, the purpose of the Vedas, the understanding of the Vedas, and the goal of the Vedas are clearly defined. Krishna, 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 basically. Krishna, Krishna, Krishna. In 16, and it says here that these next 3 verses, according to Vishwanath, he says, because I am the knower of the Vedas, I will speak in brief the essential meaning of all the Vedas in 3 verses. Please listen. And Prabhupada says, as already explained, the Lord in his incarnation as Vyasadeva compiled the Vedanta Sutra. Here the Lord is giving in summary the contents of the Vedanta Sutra, which is the summary of the Vedas. So these next verses, 16, 17, 18, are a summary of the Vedas, or of Vedanta. So the first one here, 16, is there are 2 classes of beings, the fallible and infallible, Shara and Akshara. In the material world, every living entity is fallible, and in the spiritual world, every living entity is infallible. Prabhupada gives 2 different meanings to that fallibility. He says that the living entities, who are innumerable, can be divided into 2 classes, the fallible and infallible. This is from the purport. When they are in contact with the material world, they are called jiva bhuta, and the Sanskrit word given here, shara, sarvani bhutani, mean that they are fallible. Those who are in oneness with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, however, are called infallible. Oneness does not mean that they have no individuality, but there is no disunity. They are all agreeable to the purpose of the creation. So when we're infallible, right, we're serving Krishna and following and trying to please him. So therefore we're in harmony with the spiritual creation. That means we're infallible. We're making our contribution to the spiritual world, where everything is the exchange of love between Krishna and his devotees. Here, when we're trying to be selfish, this is fallibility. And of course, we cause ourselves so much misery through that as well. So that's one meaning to fallible and infallible. One is that because we're situated in pure service, that means we're consistent to be perfect. And when we're not, when we're involved in selfishness, that's fallibility. That's one definition Prabhupada gives. And then he gives a different one, which is more literal, actually. As long as a living entity is conditioned, his body changes due to contact with matter. This is the more literal meaning of Shara and Akshara. Matter is changing, so the living entity appears to be changing. But in the spiritual world, the body is not made of matter. Therefore, there is no change. Shara sarvani bhutani. Any living entity who has come in contact with matter, beginning from the first created being Brahma down to a small ant, is changing its body. Therefore, they are all fallible. They're changing. In the spiritual world, however, they are always liberated in oneness, not changing. So, he gives 2 times the fallibility there. 17, the summary of the Vedas continues. Besides these 2, the fallible and infallible souls, there is the greatest living personality, Parama Atma, the Supreme Soul, the imperishable Lord himself, who has entered in the three worlds and is maintaining them. So, there's the Paramatma. So that's what's here. That's what's given in the verse here. Paramatma udaritaha. So there's the regular souls, regular little atmas. There's the Paramatma. Prabhupada says the idea of this verse is very nicely expressed in the Katha Upanishad and Svetashvatara Upanishad. This is one of Prabhupada's favorite verses as well. He doesn't give the Sanskrit, but we hear him quote this so much. Well, he gives a little Sanskrit there. It is clearly stated there that above the innumerable living entities, some of whom are conditioned and some of whom are liberated, there is the Supreme Personality who is Paramatma. The Upanishadic verse runs as follows: Nityo Nityanam Chaitanas Chaitananam. So he's the supreme eternal of all eternals, and it says the purport is that amongst all the living entities, both conditioned and liberated, there is one supreme living personality, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who maintains them and gives them all the facility of enjoyment according to different work. That Supreme Personality of Godhead is situated in everyone's heart as Paramatma. A wise man who can understand him is eligible to attain peace, perfect peace, not others. Mm-hmm. So it says that he. So it says in that verse that he's the Supreme Eternal amongst all eternals, and he maintains everybody else, fulfills all their desires. Mm-hmm. Now 18 finishes this little 3-verse summary of the Vedas. Because I am transcendental, beyond both the fallible, atita, beyond both the fallible and infallible, and because I am the greatest, I am celebrated both in the world and in the Vedas as that supreme person, Purusha Uttama. He says, that's me. So he identifies that the Paramatma as being part of him. So this is Krishna raising his hand. Who's the supreme? Here it is. You're looking at him. And Prabhupada says, no one can surpass the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna, neither the conditioned soul nor the liberated soul. He is therefore the greatest of personalities. Now it is clear here that the living entities and the Supreme Personality of Godhead are individuals. The difference is that the living entities, either in the conditioned state or in the liberated state, cannot surpass in quantity the inconceivable potencies of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It is incorrect to think of the Supreme Lord and the living entities as being on the same level or equal in all respects. There is always the question of superiority and inferiority between their personalities. The word Uttama is very significant. No one can surpass the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, clear. And the word Purusha Uttama is the Supreme Personality, the best of the persons. And then Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, there should be no indignation at the explanation of these 3 verses, 16 through 18, which establish the supreme position of the form of Krishna. I offer my respects to the impersonalists. May they not be offended. So he says, may they not be offended. Because that's what it is. He says, it's just the real fact, and please accept it. He's not ashamed of it. So in the last 2 verses, and now again he comes right to the point of bhakti, of course. Whoever knows me as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, this Purusha Uttama, without doubting, is the knower of everything. And he therefore engages himself in full devotional service to me, sarva bhavena bharata. Bhajati renders devotional service, sarva bhava, in all respects, to me, O son of Bharata. And then Prabhupada has a really beautiful section. There's one paragraph of his purport which really says everything and very beautifully. Sometimes I try to pick out, try to string it together like little sections of his purport. Mm-hmm. This one I just had to take the whole paragraph because it was just there was nothing repetitive. There was nothing that could be left out, nothing that could be stressed. So there are many philosophical speculations about the constitutional position of the living entities and the supreme absolute truth. Now, in this verse, the Supreme Personality of Godhead clearly explains that anyone who knows Lord Krishna to be the Supreme Person is actually the knower of everything. The imperfect knower goes on simply speculating about the absolute truth, but the perfect knower, without wasting his valuable time, engages directly in Krishna consciousness. The devotional service of the Supreme Lord. Throughout the whole of Bhagavad Gita, this fact is being stressed at every step. We've heard it so many chapters in a row now. And still there are so many stubborn commentators on Bhagavad Gita who consider the supreme absolute truth and the living entities to be one and the same. So he takes a nice little shot at them. How stupid can you be, guys? It's so clear. And the last verse in the chapter, Krishna glorifies the topic again. This is the most confidential part of the Vedic scriptures. O sinless one, and it is disclosed now by me. Whoever understands this will become wise, and his endeavors will know perfection. Buddhiman and krita krityaha, most perfect in his endeavors. And so the couple of items from the purport here. Devotional service to the Lord and the Lord himself are one and the same. Because they are spiritual, a devotional service takes place within the internal energy of the Supreme Lord. The Lord is said to be the sun, and the ignorance is called darkness. Where the sun is present, there is no question of darkness. A little back to Godhead here. Therefore, whenever a devotional service is present under the proper guidance of a bona fide spiritual master, there is no question of ignorance. Devotional service takes place with the internal energy of the Lord. So it is, and then one has to become free from all contamination, all sinful activities. Then he can understand. But devotional service is so pure and potent that once one is engaged in devotional service, he automatically comes to the stage of sinlessness. So these are nice. And then Prabhupada says, this is the last part of the purport here. While one is performing devotional service in the association of pure devotees in full Krishna consciousness, there are certain things which require to be vanquished together. The most important thing one has to surmount is the weakness of the heart. The first fall down is caused by the desire to lord it over material nature. Thus one gives up the transcendental loving service of the Supreme Lord. The second weakness of the heart is that as one increases the propensity to lord it over material nature, he becomes attached to matter and the possession of matter. The problems of material existence are due to these weaknesses of the heart. In this chapter, the first 5 verses describe the process of freeing oneself from these weaknesses of heart. That's where we describe the banyan tree and how it looks like. And the rest of the chapter, from the 6th verse to the end, discusses Purushottam Yoga. How we can understand the situation, how we can understand the presence of Krishna, how we can help us to surrender to him.
First thing to remember, we were talking about the 6 senses, including the mind.
Yeah, the mind is the sixth one. Yeah.
So what about the intelligence? Intelligence and the ego.
Yeah, that's why directly in the verses, Krishna didn't seem to mention them. He was I guess he just making a kind of a summary thing.
I see.
And because both Prabhupada, especially because Prabhupada he said that one carries the conceptions of one's life, from one to the other. And so he already generalized that. Mm-hmm. And when Vishwanath, he says it's the 6 senses of the mind, but then he says and the subtle body, and the rest of the subtle body. So right. Krishna is just kind of, he's giving you a little thumbnail of it. He implies everything else too.
Oh, I see.
It's not just those things, but all those things. He's just saying kind of shorthand, he's saying it shortly.
Okay. And to similar to this, actually, after a couple of 4-5 slides, when there was a verse when body the soul go to the another body, then you
so
mentioned that
the senses.
Then you carry everything. The body carry the 6 senses as well as the subtle body also. So is that like
no? What happens is, of course, the part of the senses, of course, when they mean the senses, it doesn't mean like we carry the same eyeballs with us.
So
but we have the ability to perceive them.
Yeah,
we have the ability to perceive. That's a function of the intelligence, really.
Okay, because one of the senses is the mind. Mind is kind of memory, and then I was thinking if the body is going to carry all this mind, intelligence, and other senses. So what about the memory? Are we carrying the memory?
Oh, the memory is there. Memory is part of the subtle body. The mind says remembers so many different things.
We don't remember anything.
Well, we don't remember consciously. That's controlled by the super soul, and that's partially so that we can take our lives seriously.
Oh, I see.
All right, because we want to enjoy. We don't want to know
Go into the
that.
memory.
But things that some of the deep impressions that are in us, they're sometimes we're reminded of that. Like we have already attachment and aversions. We have a personality when we come in, and there's some things we just don't like, or some things will.
Right.
Some people have phobias of things, There's even sometimes people do these the hypnotic regressions.
Yeah.
And so sometimes like people develop a certain phobia at a certain age, and sometimes they find out that in some past life they had a traumatic experience, and so it kind of gets remembered in that sense. The super soul helps them with that.
I see.
So those things are there. It says in the Bhagavatam also that sometimes if we think of something that we don't think we've ever experienced, that it means we've probably experienced it from a previous life.